rejected by her mate, but he didn't know she was the royal alpha princess. The moon hung heavy over the kingdom of the lichens, casting its pale glow across the dense forest that bordered the royal palace. The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it whispers of old stories, legends that had been passed down through the centuries. One such legend spoke of an alpha, a ruler of the lichens, whose mate would hold the power to save or destroy them all. Seraphine, the princess of the kingdom, had heard these stories all her life. She knew she was destined to one day meet her mate, the one her heart would recognize without question. But deep inside, she feared that moment. Seraphine was no ordinary princess. She was the royal alpha, the future ruler of her people. As the daughter of King Roderick, she had been groomed for this role from birth. She was strong, powerful, and respected by all who knew her. But as she sat in her chamber staring out at the moon, she could not ignore the unease that had settled in her heart. She had always known that the bond between mates was a powerful, unbreakable force. It was said that when a lichen met their mate, they would feel an instant connection, a pull so strong that nothing could sever it. But Seraphine had always feared that moment. She had seen the way her father and mother's bond had weakened over the years, the strain that came with the responsibilities of ruling. Love was a dangerous thing for someone like her. She had to be strong, unwavering. Anything else would make her weak. And then she met Cale. Cale was a warrior, a brooding, quiet man who had earned his place in the kingdom through sheer strength. He was not from noble blood, but he had fought in countless battles and earned the respect of the people. His eyes, dark as night, held secrets that Seraphine could not understand. When their paths crossed for the first time, she had felt the unmistakable pull of the mate bond. It had taken everything in her not to rush forward, to claim him as her own. But she did not. She could not. She watched him from afar, the weight of her title and her duties pressing down on her shoulders. Cale, however, did not seem to notice the bond. He was a man of action, focused solely on his mission. And yet, something lingered between them. There was a tension, an unspoken connection that neither of them could deny. The first time she spoke to him, it was on the training grounds. He had been observing the warriors, her eyes scanning the men as they practiced their combat skills. When Cale entered the field, the others seemed to step aside, giving him room to move. There was something about the way he carried himself, his confidence, his strength, that made him stand out. "Princess," he said, his voice low and steady as he met her gaze. "What brings you here?" Seraphine's heart skipped a beat. She had never expected him to speak to her like this, so openly, without the usual formalities. She cleared her throat, trying to steady herself. "I wanted to see the warriors in action," she replied, her voice firm but laced with curiosity. "You're one of the best, I hear." Cale's lips curved into a small, almost amused smile. "I do what I can." Their eyes met for a moment longer than necessary, and for a split second Seraphine felt that pull again. The bond between them, a force so powerful it made her breath catch. But she quickly suppressed it, reminding herself that she was a princess, not a woman to be swept away by such emotions. Over the following weeks, their paths crossed more frequently. Each time the connection between them grew stronger. Yet Cale never acknowledged it. He remained distant, focused on his duties. And Seraphine, despite her growing feelings, kept her distance, unsure of how to approach him. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, Seraphine found herself alone in the palace gardens. The weight of the kingdom's expectations was suffocating, and she longed for a moment of peace. She sat on a stone bench, her hands clasped in her lap, her thoughts swirling. That was when Cale appeared, stepping into the garden as if drawn by some unseen force. His eyes found hers immediately, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence between them. No titles, no expectations. Just the raw connection of two souls meeting. "You're always so guarded, Princess," Cale said softly, his voice like a whisper in the wind. Seraphine looked up at him, her heart racing. She had never expected him to speak so directly, to see through the walls she had built around herself. I have to be, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. I have a duty to my people. Cale stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. And what of yourself? He asked, his words cutting through the tension. What do you want, princess? Her breath caught in her throat. It was the first time anyone had asked her that. Truly asked her what she wanted, not what was expected of her. She looked away, struggling to find her words. I don't know, she admitted, her voice shaky. I've spent my whole life preparing for this. But sometimes, I wonder if it's enough. Cale's eyes softened, his expression unreadable. For a moment, it seemed as if he might reach out to her. But instead, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, her heart aching. The rejection was swift, like a cold wind cutting through her. She had expected it, in a way. She was the royal alpha, a woman of power and responsibility. Cale could never see her as anything more than that, never see the woman behind the title, the one who longed for something more, something real. Days passed, and Seraphine couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She couldn't stop thinking about Cale, the way his presence had stirred something inside her, something she had never felt before. And yet he had rejected her. He had turned away from the bond that called to him. But what if he didn't know who she truly was? What if he had rejected her because he didn't understand the depth of their connection, the power of their bond? What if he didn't realize that she was more than just a princess? She was the royal alpha, the one destined to rule beside him. That night, as she lay awake in her chamber, the decision weighed heavily on her heart. She could not let this bond slip away. She would find Cale, and she would make him see the truth. He had to know who she was. She could no longer hide in the shadows of her own fears. But the question remained, would Cale accept her once he knew the truth? Or would he reject her once more? The night stretched on, and Seraphine found herself standing on the balcony, the cool night air brushing against her skin. She gazed up at the moon, the silent witness to her inner turmoil. The fate of her heart and the kingdom was in her hands. But first, she had to face the man who held the key to both. Seraphine couldn't shake the image of Cale walking away from her in the garden. The way he had rejected her still stung, but it wasn't the sting of hurt pride. It was something deeper, a pain in her chest that refused to fade. She was the royal alpha, the one destined to lead her people. And yet in that moment, standing in the shadows of the palace, she felt smaller than ever before. The bond between them, strong and undeniable, was still there, a silent force that lingered like a shadow. She had tried to ignore it, tried to push it aside, but now it felt impossible. Every time she thought of Cale, of the way his eyes had locked with hers, her heart would race, and the curse of the mate bond seemed to tighten around her. She had never wanted this. She had never wanted to be this vulnerable, to feel this exposed. But there was no denying it. Cale was her mate. The following days were filled with the weight of her decision. She had spent her entire life preparing for the throne, training to be the ruler her people needed. Love had never been part of her plans. It had been an inconvenience, a distraction for those too weak to focus on what truly mattered. But now, with Cale's rejection echoing in her mind, she could no longer deny that the bond was more than just a distraction. It was a part of her she couldn't escape. Seraphine spent her days in the palace, fulfilling her royal duties, but her mind was always elsewhere. Every time she saw Cale from afar, every time their eyes met for a brief moment, her heart would leap in her chest. But the moment always passed, and Cale would turn away, as if the bond between them was nothing more than a passing breeze. He refused to acknowledge it, and Seraphine wondered if it was because he didn't want to, or if he simply couldn't. She knew little of Cale's past, of the things that had shaped him into the man he was, the warrior who held a distance from the world, who kept his emotions locked away. He was a man who had seen war, who had fought and bled for the kingdom. But behind that stoic exterior, Seraphine suspected there was more. She had caught glimpses of his pain, flashes of something deeper that he never let anyone see. And that, she realized, was the key to understanding him. One evening, after a long day of meetings and royal matters, Seraphine found herself in the palace's training grounds again. The night air was cool against her skin, and the distant sound of wolves howling in the forest reminded her of the world outside the walls of the kingdom. Her thoughts, as always, turned to Cale. She could still feel the weight of his rejection, but it was not just the sting of his words that haunted her. It was the question that lingered. Why had he rejected her? It was then that she saw him. Cale was standing in the far corner of the training grounds, his back to her as he practiced with his sword. His movements were fluid, controlled, and yet there was something about the way he moved that seemed restless. His eyes were focused, but there was a darkness in his gaze, something that spoke of untold pain. Seraphine hesitated for a moment, watching him from the shadows. She wasn't sure if she was ready to confront him again, but the pull of the bond was too strong to ignore. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward, her footsteps barely making a sound on the stone floor. She approached him slowly, not wanting to startle him. Cale's sword sliced through the air with precision, but when he felt her presence behind him, he froze. For a moment there was silence, and then he turned, his eyes locking with hers. Seraphine's heart skipped a beat, but she refused to let her emotions show. "Cale," she said softly, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. Cale's jaw tightened, and he lowered his sword. "Princess," he said, his tone neutral but laced with something she couldn't quite place. "What brings you here?" "I came to speak with you," she replied, standing tall despite the weight of the moment. "We need to talk." Cale's gaze softened, but only for a moment. "I've already said all that needs to be said," he said, his voice cold. "There's nothing more to discuss." Seraphine's chest tightened at his words, but she pressed on. "You don't understand," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "The bond between us, it's not just something I can ignore. It's a part of who I am, and I know you feel it too." Cale looked away, his eyes hardening again as he took a step back. "I don't want to feel it," he muttered, almost to himself. "You're the Royal Alpha. I'm just a warrior. You deserve someone better, someone who can be what you need." Seraphine's heart clenched at his words. She knew that Cale didn't understand, that he couldn't see beyond the walls he had built around himself. But she also knew that she couldn't give up on him, not when the bond between them was so strong. She wasn't just the Royal Alpha. She was Seraphine. And if there was one thing she knew, it was that she would fight for what she wanted. "I don't need someone better," she said, her voice firm. "I need you." Cale's expression faltered, but he quickly masked it with a look of indifference. "I'm not the one you want," he said, his voice rough. "I'm not the man you think I am." "You're wrong," Seraphine replied, stepping closer. "You're everything I've been searching for, even if you can't see it." For a moment, Cale didn't speak. His eyes met hers, and there was something in his gaze that made her heart ache. It was a mixture of longing and fear, a fear of something he couldn't control. She could feel it, the battle raging inside him, the desire to fight the bond, to push her away, but also the undeniable pull that kept drawing him closer.
"I'm not good for you," Cale said finally, his voice softer now, more vulnerable.
"You're meant for greatness. I'm just a soldier." Seraphine's heart softened, and she took a step closer to him. "And I'm just a woman," she said gently. "A woman who wants you, Cale. Not the warrior, not the title, just you." For the first time, Cale's guard seemed to drop. His eyes searched hers as if looking for the truth in her words. And for a brief moment, Seraphine thought he might finally see her. But then, as if some invisible wall slammed down between them, he stepped back, his eyes hardening again.
"This isn't a fairy tale, Princess," Cale said, his voice cold once more.
"You can't just wish this all away." Seraphine stood still, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew what she had to do.
"I'm not asking for a fairy tale," she said quietly. "I'm asking for a chance."
"A chance for us to figure this out. Together." Cale's gaze flickered to the ground, and for a moment it seemed as if he might speak again. But instead he turned away, his sword clenched tightly in his hand. I can't give you that, he said, his voice low. I'm sorry. With that, he walked away, leaving Seraphine standing alone in the training grounds, the weight of his rejection settling heavily in her chest. But this time, something inside her shifted. She wasn't going to give up. She couldn't. The bond between them was too strong, and Seraphine knew that if she wanted to be with Cale, she had to fight for him. Fight for their love, no matter the cost. As she stood there in the silence of the night, Seraphine made a vow to herself. She would break through Cale's walls, no matter how long it took. She would make him see that they were meant to be together. No more running, no more hiding. The future of the kingdom, and her heart, depended on it. The days following Cale's rejection had felt like an eternity to Seraphine. Despite the weight of his words, the pull between them had not faded. If anything, it had grown stronger, tugging at her heart like an invisible thread. She spent her nights lying awake in her bed, thinking of him, wondering why he rejected her so fiercely. Why couldn't he see the truth of their bond? Why couldn't he accept it? Seraphine had always believed that strength meant control. That power came from keeping everything locked inside, from never showing vulnerability. But now, as she stood in the palace halls, she felt as if her entire world was unraveling. The weight of her crown felt heavier each day. The responsibility of being the royal alpha, of leading her people, had never felt more isolating. Every decision she made seemed to push her further away from the man she loved, and yet, she knew she could not abandon her duty. The Lycan kingdom depended on her. Her father, King Roderick, had always taught her that leadership meant sacrifice, that the good of the kingdom came before all else. But Seraphine had always believed that there was a balance to be found, a way to lead and still live a life of love. Now, however, she wasn't so sure. Her feelings for Cale had made her question everything. Could she truly lead with a heart so divided? Could she rule without the love that her soul longed for? In the days following their last encounter, Seraphine sought answers. She dug deeper into the history of the Lycan kingdom and the ancient prophecies that surrounded the bond between mates. The more she learned, the more she understood the power and the danger of what they shared. The mate bond was not just a connection between two souls. It was a force of nature, one that could shape the fate of entire kingdoms. But Seraphine had never been one to shy away from power. If anything, she had always embraced it. She was the royal alpha, destined to rule. The thought of abandoning her role for a love that might never be returned seemed impossible. And yet, her heart cried out for Cale. As she walked through the castle, lost in her thoughts, she was suddenly pulled from her reverie by the sound of hurried footsteps behind her. She turned to find one of her royal advisors, Lord Alaric, approaching quickly. "Your Highness?" Alaric said, bowing his head respectfully.
"There is urgent news from the borders. A group of rogue wolves has been spotted, and they're moving closer to the kingdom."
"We believe they might be planning an attack." Seraphine's mind raced. The kingdom was still recovering from the last war, and any attack now would be devastating. She had to act quickly. "Gather the warriors! Prepare for defense!" she ordered, her voice steady despite the rising panic inside her. "We will not let them breach our lands."
As Alaric rushed off to carry out her orders, Seraphine felt a flicker of uncertainty. This was her responsibility.
Her people depended on her strength. But how could she focus on this threat when her heart was still torn by Cale's rejection?
The battle outside the palace gates seemed so distant compared to the war that raged within her own soul. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Seraphine stood on the palace balcony, staring out at the vast forests beyond the castle walls. The wind whipped through her hair, and the cool air helped to clear the fog that had settled in her mind. She could feel the pull of the mate bond again, as if Cale was out there somewhere, feeling it too. She had to speak to him. She had to understand why he had rejected her so fiercely. But she knew that if she approached him again, it could mean risking everything, her duty, her kingdom, and her heart. What if Cale rejected her again? What if the bond was nothing more than a curse, one that would destroy them both? With a sigh, Seraphine turned away from the balcony,
and headed toward her private chambers. She needed to think. She needed a plan. But as she entered her room, her eyes were drawn to the small chest that sat at the foot of her bed. It was a simple chest made of dark wood and adorned with intricate carvings of wolves. It was a gift from her mother, passed down through generations of royal alphas. Inside the chest were her most treasured possessions, the things she had kept hidden from the world. She had not opened it in years, but something urged her to do so now. With trembling hands, she unlocked the chest and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in soft velvet, was a small weathered scroll. It was a prophecy, one that her father had shown her when she was young. It spoke of the mate bond and the power it held, the power to destroy or save. Seraphine unrolled the scroll carefully, her eyes scanning the ancient text. The prophecy was clear. When the royal alpha met her mate, she would be faced with a choice: embrace the bond and risk losing herself in the process, or reject it and face the consequences of a broken heart. As Seraphine read the words, she felt a sense of dread wash over her. The prophecy did not promise a happy ending. It did not promise that she would find peace in the mate bond. Instead, it spoke of sacrifice and struggle, of a choice between love and duty. Her heart pounded as she realized the truth. The bond between her and Cale was not just a gift. It was a test, and if she wanted to be with him, she would have to sacrifice something important. But what? What could she give up to secure their future? And was she willing to make that sacrifice? The sound of footsteps outside her door interrupted her thoughts, and Seraphine quickly hid the scroll back in the chest. She turned to find Lord Alaric standing in the doorway, his expression grave. "Your Highness," he said, bowing his head. "The rogue wolves have been spotted closer now, and we've received word that they have an army. The battle will be difficult." Seraphine nodded, her mind racing. She couldn't ignore her duty, no matter the cost. "Prepare the warriors," she said firmly. "I'll lead the charge myself." As Alaric bowed and left, Seraphine took a deep breath. She had to be strong. For her people, for her kingdom. But in the back of her mind, Cale's rejection haunted her. The bond between them was powerful, and it was only growing stronger with each passing day. Seraphine had spent her whole life preparing for this moment, the moment when she would become the Royal Alpha and lead her people into a new era. But now, with the bond between her and Cale tearing at her soul, she wasn't sure if she could continue on this path without him. She had always believed that love was a distraction, that power was what truly mattered. But now, as she faced the looming battle, she realized that perhaps she had been wrong all along. If Cale was truly her mate, then love was not a distraction. It was the most powerful force in the world. But what was she willing to sacrifice to keep that love? The moon hung high above the kingdom, its silver light casting an ethereal glow across the forest. Seraphine stood at the edge of the royal palace staring into the distance. The battle had been fierce, but they had won. The rogue wolves were pushed back, and the kingdom was safe, for now. But Seraphine knew this victory was only temporary. A far greater battle awaited her, one that could decide the fate of her heart, her kingdom, and the very future of the Lycan people. The bond between Seraphine and Cale was still there, pulsing in the air like an untamed fire. It had not dimmed despite the rejection, despite the distance between them. If anything, it had only grown stronger. But Cale was still out there, still haunted by his past and unwilling to embrace the bond. Seraphine had tried everything to make him see the truth, but every attempt had been met with his stubborn resistance. She turned away from the balcony, her heart heavy with the burden of the choice she faced. Her father, King Roderick, had always taught her that the throne came first. That duty and responsibility were the foundation of true leadership. But now, standing alone in the quiet of the night, Seraphine wondered if that was enough. Could she be the leader her people needed while carrying the weight of unfulfilled love? Could she rule while her heart cried out for the one man she could not have? The sound of footsteps approaching broke her from her thoughts. She turned to find Lord Alaric standing in the doorway, his expression as solemn as ever. "Your Highness," he said, bowing his head respectfully. "There's been, a development." We've received word that Cale has disappeared. No one knows where he's gone. Seraphine's heart skipped a beat. She had not seen Cale since the day of the battle. They had not spoken since his rejection. And though she had tried to move forward, the truth was she could not forget him. "Where did he go?" she asked, her voice steady despite the surge of worry that rose within her. "We're not sure," Alaric replied. "But there are rumors that he's left for the mountains. There's an old temple hidden deep within them, a place said to hold great power. Some believe he may be seeking answers there." Seraphine felt a surge of urgency in her chest. The mountains were dangerous, a place where few ventured and even fewer returned. She couldn't let Cale go alone, not when he was still wrestling with the curse that held him back from embracing their bond. If he sought the temple for answers, it could be a sign that he was ready to face the truth. Or it could mean he was giving up on her and on them. "I'm going after him," Seraphine said, her decision firm. "Prepare the horses. We leave at dawn." Alaric hesitated for a moment, his brow furrowing in concern. "Your Highness, this journey is treacherous. It's too dangerous. You must remain here and focus on your duties."
"I cannot remain here, not while Cale is out there," Seraphine replied, her voice unwavering.
"I need to know if he is ready to accept the bond between us. I need to understand if we have a future together, or if I must face this responsibility alone." Alaric bowed his head, a sign of respect for her determination. "As you wish, Your Highness." The next morning, Seraphine set out on her journey to the mountains. The road was long, and the air grew colder as they ascended into the hills. She rode alone, the wind whipping through her hair as the towering trees passed by in a blur. Her thoughts were consumed by Cale, by the rejection, by the prophecy, and by the bond that she could not ignore. She was no longer just the royal alpha. She was a woman torn between love and duty, between the man she longed for and the kingdom that depended on her. As the hours passed, Seraphine's thoughts turned inward. She knew that she could not let fear or doubt guide her. The bond between her and Cale was not a curse. It was a gift. It was a promise of something greater, something that could unite them in a way that would change the course of the kingdom. But Cale had to see it too. He had to believe that their love was worth fighting for. When Seraphine reached the base of the mountains, the landscape grew more rugged. The path ahead was treacherous, a winding trail that led deep into the heart of the wilderness. She urged her horse forward, feeling the weight of the decision that lay ahead. She had come here to find Cale, but she had also come to find herself. She had to know if she was willing to sacrifice everything for love. After hours of climbing, Seraphine reached the temple, a crumbling structure nestled among the cliffs. The air was thick with an ancient energy, and the scent of damp stone filled her lungs. She dismounted and approached the entrance, her heart racing with anticipation. She did not know what she would find inside, but she knew that she had to face it. Inside the temple, the air was cool and still. The walls were covered in ancient carvings, each one telling a story of power and sacrifice. Seraphine walked slowly through the halls, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She felt as though she were being drawn deeper into the temple, guided by some unseen force. And then, at the end of the hall, she saw him. Cale stood in front of a large ancient altar, his back to her. His posture was rigid, his shoulders tense. He had not yet noticed her arrival. Seraphine's heart ached as she watched him, the man she loved, standing alone in this place of power and mystery. "Cale!" she called softly, her voice breaking the silence. Cale turned sharply, his eyes wide with surprise. "Seraphine?" His voice was rough, as if he had not spoken in days. "What are you doing here?" "I came to find you," Seraphine said, stepping forward. "I had to know if you were ready to face the truth." "I had to know if we have a future together." Cale's eyes softened, but there was still hesitation in his gaze. "I don't know if I can accept the bond," he admitted, his voice heavy with emotion. "I've always believed that I was not worthy of you, that I would only bring pain and destruction into your life." Seraphine's heart clenched at his words. "Cale, the bond is not a curse," she said softly. "It's not a burden. It's a gift. We were meant to be together, but I can't force you to see that. I can't make you accept it. Kale stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers.
I've spent my whole life running from my past, he said, his voice low. I've hurt people. Damn. I've made mistakes. And I thought that if I pushed you away, I could protect you from all the darkness inside me.
Seraphine reached out, her hand brushing his. You don't have to be alone, she whispered. You don't have to fight this anymore. We can face it together. For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of the past hanging between them. And then, as if the walls Kale had built around himself had finally crumbled, he pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. I'm sorry, Kale whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I've been so afraid of losing you that I pushed you away. But I see now that I was wrong. I don't want to be afraid anymore. I want to be with you. Seraphine smiled, her heart soaring. We'll face the future together, Kale, she said softly. We'll fight for our love, no matter what it costs. As they stood there in the heart of the temple, the bond between them flared brightly, filling the air with warmth. Seraphine knew that their journey was far from over. There would still be challenges, still be obstacles to overcome. But for the first time in her life, she felt complete. She was no longer just the Royal Alpha. She was Seraphine, half of a pair, bound by love and destiny. Together they would face whatever came next.